Is this little phone one of the most interesting phones of the year so far? I think it is. So reports suggest that smartphone sales in the US in particular are starting to go a bit stale, which isn't great news for Apple, whose iPhone 15 is coming out next month, and their task, I think, in rejuvenating iPhone sales and making the smartphone industry more exciting in general is made so much harder when Samsung is doing it already. The biggest question about the iPhone 15 is, who cares? And I have a feeling it's not as many people as the people who care about devices like the Flip 5, because this is incredibly interesting. And I've been playing with Samsung's Z, and we do say Z in this country, in fact, we just say Z. That is what we say. The Z Flip 5 for the last few days. And, well, this isn't your standard Z Flip 5 review. It's more a case of, what is this thing like to use? And far more importantly, what should you know before buying a Flip 5? And, well, is it as interesting as I've just made out? Because I've made quite a claim at the start of this video, I've just realised, and I need to kind of come good on that. But trust me, there's a lot to talk about. Firstly, apologies if you can hear the construction noises outside. They're ripping up the road. I can't do much about that, unfortunately. But let's have a very quick chat about the basics of the Flip 5. Because for all of its flipping and folding and clever marketing, it is just a smartphone. The good news is that it's a very good phone. So it's got the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip in here, which is the latest Snapdragon chip. That's good news. And we are at a point now where most smartphones over £1,000/ $1,000 are just incredibly quick, and this has enough headroom for gamers and for people who do push their smartphones beyond normal use. It's also incredibly well made. I mentioned this when I reviewed the Flip 4 last year. If you haven't held a Samsung Flip phone before, you're in for a treat. These are incredibly well made devices. The one big change to this, well, there's one very big change which I'll come to later, but in terms of the design, the kind of physics of this thing, the Flip 4, when it was closed, had a bit of a gap here. On the Flip 5, we don't have that. It's completely sandwiched shut, so there's no gap whatsoever. It's another refinement, and it's another example of Samsung really working on these foldable phones. But everything else about it screams premium. It feels like you're spending a lot of money, which you are. This one cost me about £950, but that was after the discounts that you get from ordering from Samsung at launch, which they are very generous with that stuff. But we can't get away from the fact that the base model of this with 256 gig is £1,049. And if you want the 512 gig version, it's £1,149. So this isn't a cheap phone, although it is a lot cheaper than the Fold 5. It's got a fantastic battery as well. It sails past 1 day. You can probably, with fairly minimal use, get 2 days out of this thing, which is pretty impressive, bearing in mind it folds and has the 2 displays and all that stuff. Not that folding uses battery life, but you get my point. As for the hinge, I think it's an absolute masterpiece. So we can see Samsung written proudly there, and as you open it, the hinge basically disappears. And it feels really smooth, there's no creaking. I know this is a new device and over time we'll have to see how it fares, but Samsung is mastering this. It's a really impressive piece of kit. As for the displays, they are typically Samsung. They are bright, vibrant, very colourful, and yes, you do say displays plural because you have the main internal display here and then something else behind, which I'll get to in a moment. As for the camera system, it is typically Samsung once again, so the images it produces won't be to everyone's taste, but I do like them. When it gets it right, it really gets them right. I have had some issues with shutter lag where you get these kind of blurry images for, taking photos of fast moving subjects like dogs and kids, but if you can put that to one side, the Flip 5 does produce some stunning images. Although the star of the show when it comes to the camera system, ironically, isn't the cameras. I'll come on to what it is later. But first, what do you need to know before you buy a Z Flip 5? I had to abandon the studio because of all that construction noise, so let's just continue from here. Now, if you've watched anything on TV or on YouTube recently, you'll have been hit with Samsung adverts about joining the flip side. They're really going very hard at the whole flip and fold thing, and because of that, you might be tempted to buy a Flip 5, and I completely understand why, because it looks like a very desirable phone, but it's not for everyone, trust me. The first thing is that price. Once you go into £1,000, $1,000 territory, you are into flagship zone, and I do think the Flip 5 is a flagship phone. I think it is built like one. I think it has features that give it a reason to be a flagship phone. The big thing the Z Flip5 has going for it is the fact that it folds. It feels special, it feels different, it feels like you're getting something significant for your money, and I'll tell you what, that novelty does not wear off quickly. And the Flip 5 has some really compelling benefits over much bigger phones like the Fold 5 and the Google Pixel tablet, and it is the size. The fact that once you've folded the Flip 5, it is so small, it slots into your pocket without even knowing it's there, and it's a very satisfying thing to kind of fiddle with and turn around in your hands. There are two things to bear in mind with that though. The first thing is that it isn't a one-handed operation unflipping the Flip 5. You do see some people in reviews and in the adverts who just kind of do this one-handed flick thing. My worry is that I do that and it goes flying across the room. For me, the Flip 5, if I can just demonstrate for you, is a two-handed operation. So I have to do it like this, whereas some people do this kind of, if I do it in here, it will go through my windscreen. It's not an issue, but the thing to bear in mind with that is that every time you want to get into your phone and do something meaningful, it's a bit of an event. You have to get used to doing this, and the novelty of that might wear off for certain people. I also think the Flip 5 is much better without a case. So if you're the sort of person who has to put a case on their smartphone immediately, the fact that this is a much better thing naked might bother you. Particularly when you take into account the whole one-handed flipping thing, you have to be very confident in your grip of the Flip 5. I remember when I first got my Flip 4, I dropped it straight away and I bought a case for it, and the case was inevitably horrible. The other thing to bear in mind is that once unflipped, the Flip 5 is a very tall device. It's about the same height as an iPhone 14 Pro Max, but it is narrower, which means you get quite a narrow typing experience. So let's get on to the biggest feature of the Flip 5, the flex window. I think it's pretty obvious that the biggest selling point for the Flip 5 as far as Samsung is concerned is that great big new flex window, which is 3.4 inches versus the 1.9 inches on the Flip 4. And the flex window can be configured with a bunch of Samsung's own widgets, so these include things like the calendar, weather, alarms and Samsung Health. There's also integration with Spotify and Google Finance, which means there is some third-party support, but I'd love to see more non-Samsung third-party widgets on there. Now, on the subject of third parties, it is possible to run other non-Samsung apps on the Flex window, and these include things like Netflix and YouTube and WhatsApp and a couple of others, but they are restricted to Samsung's choices. You can't add any more than that unless you install a specific app. And that app is called GoodLock. It's a very easy installation. I'll put some instructions in the description below, and it's worth doing because you can basically add any installed app on your Flip 5 to that flex window, and most of them work pretty well. You just have to bear in mind that you haven't got a very big screen to play with, and some of the features don't work in all apps, but the fact you can get a QWERTY keyboard up, which is usable, it's a bit annoying after a while. It's the kind of keyboard you'd use for short messages rather than writing novels, but the fact you can get that up means you can do quite a bit with most apps on the flex window. The flex window can also be customized with your own wallpaper, and this is where this phone really becomes very personal. Samsung gives us quite a few options when it comes to the wallpaper, including things like graphical, color-based, and what they call simple. But where it really comes alive and becomes your own phone is when you choose a wallpaper where you can add your own images. There's also a couple of animated wallpapers which are fun and add a huge amount of character to an already very characterful phone. I think clearly the biggest feature of the flex window on the Flip 5, which confusingly is still referred to as the cover screen in settings, but that's a hangover from the Flip 4, I guess. But by far, I think Samsung's crowning glory with this is the photographic capabilities. With the Flip 5 closed, if you double press the power button, you get to the camera app and you see a lovely big preview of the photo on that cover display. Sorry, flex window. And from there, you can just tap the screen to take a photo, or you can raise your hand or put your thumbs up and it will take the photo automatically. And remember, it's using the main camera system for this because the phone is closed, so it's not using the slightly downgraded internal camera. You're getting the full fat camera on the back of the phone as a selfie cam. Now, this feature isn't unique to the Flip 5. You get it on foldables like the Google Pixel Fold, on the Fold 5 from Samsung, but there's something about taking selfies on the Flip 5 that is really addictive. It's just so quick, so convenient, and because the Flip 5 is so small when folded, it fits in your hand perfectly for taking those kind of photos. I think it's a very high quality selfie experience as well. I've had loads of fun taking photos with this phone, and I think the results in all sorts of different conditions are really impressive. And as you'd guess, you can also use that great big flex window for shooting video, which is really, really useful for a very specific bunch of people. Also, the ability to have the Flip 5 like this on a tabletop where it's basically standing on its own will means it's fantastic for doing vertical video. So if you're a TikToker or an Instagram reel type person, and I do this sort of content, it's super handy just for that reason. You can kind of flip up your phone, ramble on and talk about really cool stuff for TikTok and publish it. It's a lot easier than using that massive thing over there. So that flex window really is a defining feature of the Flip 5. I think Samsung has been very smart in making that the key thing they're focusing on. And if you're wondering, watching Netflix and YouTube and that sort of stuff on that display, even that is quite an enjoyable experience. Okay, for that purpose, it's quite a small display, but if you just want to catch up on your favorite YouTubers or dig into your latest season of whatever it is that you're watching, you can do that very quickly, very conveniently, just like those selfies. It's just a very convenient thing to use, and no other smartphone offers that. As I've always said with foldable phones, you have to really, really want one to buy one. That's mainly because of the price, but it's also because of the compromises. So the Flip 5 isn't for you if you don't like the thought of having a crease on the display. The crease is there, you can see it, you can feel it, it's going nowhere. Equally, if the thought of having to open a phone every time you want to use it bothers you, the Flip 5 isn't for you. However, if you're willing to accept those compromises, the Flip 5, I think, delivers a huge amount of value. The novelty doesn't wear off, like I mentioned earlier, it stays for a long time, and also that flex window is genuinely useful. And my litmus test for Android phones these days is whether or not I want to return to them after the review period, because I do swap Android phones very regularly. Normally they get put in a drawer and occasionally brought out for a comparison, but I have a feeling the Flip 5 might tug at my heartstrings a little bit more. So let me know if you're going to go for the Flip 5 in the comments and why. Equally, if you're not going to go for it, let me know why. And another phone that is tugging at my heartstrings at the moment is the Nothing Phone 2. Hang around for a link to that full review.